First of all, let me say it's really it's an honor for me to be here with you today. And Mayor Brown, keep doing the great work that you're doing. It's really, it was a breath of fresh air listening to you talk and the way that you approach public policy and governance. We need a lot more of that around. But let me go to the subject of dealing with victims of crimes and then survivors of crime, because before you can be a survivor, you get victimized first, and then we hope that there is an evolution, and then you become a survivor. This is an area that often I think is ignored by the criminal justice system. Our system is very focused on dealing with the offender, and while we do have victim services in our district attorney's office, certainly in the state of California, when you look at most of the legislative development in the last 30 years around crime, while we often use the name of a victim as the driving force behind new legislation, the reality is that the legislation is primarily focused on punishing the offender, and there is very little work that is done around protecting the victim and helping the victim become a successful survivor. It is a problem that has created an environment in our communities around the country where we have repeat victimization over and over again. And what we often do not do while we're focusing on punishing the offender because they're making us hungry and we want to make sure that we get a pound of flesh, is that there is this trail of people that are hurt. They're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with many other problems, and there is often nowhere that they can turn to. They may cooperate with the prosecution or not. If they cooperate, they will get the attention during the time that there is a trial. And as soon as the trial is over, we all move on to the next case, and we never really take a moment to look back at this human being that has been impacted possibly for life, the family, and the community. And I have to tell you that repeat victimization is one of the major causes of crime and insecurity in many of our communities. We in San Francisco are starting to look at a very different way of looking at crime and victimization and survivorship in public safety. And we look for a concept that is called parallel justice, where while we're going to definitely deal with the offender, and we want to make sure that we're dealing with the offender in a thoughtful and effective way so they hopefully will not reoffend and have more victims behind them, but we're also dealing with the victim to ensure that the victim gets parallel justice. And that, I'd like to tell you, that in my opinion is much more than simply convicting the offender. So in the process of seeking parallel justice, one of the things that we have to recognize is that the victim and then the survivor need to have trauma-informed care, and that we have to stay with them to make sure that they're not going to be re-victimized. Often we talk about repeat offenders, but a conversation that is very seldom discussed in the criminal justice system is repeat victimization. We have some communities where victims get victimized over and over and over again. And we wonder why there is such a high degree of insecurity in those communities. So, the other part that we often do not recognize is that when you have been exposed to trauma and excessive violence from a very early age, you're either going to turn that trauma inwards and you're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to turn it outwards and you're going to hurt others. So again, dealing with public safety from a very different point of view, I think is key to the success of the criminal justice system in the 21st century in this country, is key to reducing incarceration, is key to creating a more socially just criminal justice system, and is key to the safety of all of us. In my office, one of the things that we have done is we started by recognizing that many of our more vulnerable victims would not be coming to the Hall of Justice, will not be coming to a major government building in order to seek assistance. So we started by moving parts of our victim services into those communities that were most impacted by crime. And we made sure that our victim service is not only in those communities, but it's also there in a way that is meaningful to those communities. So it's culturally sensitive to the needs of those communities, and it takes into consideration that often many of our most vulnerable victims may have language deficiencies that they will not be able to understand or get the help that they need in English. The other thing that we have done in this effort to make sure that we're culturally sensitive is that we're working with people in the communities that come from those communities. People that understand what it's like to live, to raise a family, and to survive in many of those communities where often crime goes on unchecked for way too long. And rather than focusing just simply incarcerating the offender, we're turning the dialogue around. One of the things that we have done, for instance, is we partner with the Center for Youth and Wellness in the Bayview. And with this group, we have worked in trauma-informed care to make sure that young people that are being exposed to high degrees of violence very early on are going to get the treatment that they need to become successful adults. The other thing that is critically important in our work is that we deal with mental health issues. Again, even in the more enlightening process within the criminal justice system, we will often talk about mental health services or substance abuse services for the offender, but very seldom does anyone say, wait a minute, what about the victim? What about the survivor of a crime who needs mental health services, who may have, as a result of the trauma, become a user of drugs and get into a cycle of self-destruction that they cannot get out of it on their own. So substance abuse services, mental health services need to be also present when we're talking about dealing with victims and survivors of crime. The other thing is, as we move down this path, it is critical for us to be mindful that the best way to make a community safe is to prevent crime from occurring in the first place. Is to provide meaningful opportunities for people in those communities that are often most hurt by crime, and to make sure that we, as policymakers and community leaders, are working together hand in hand to ensure that these communities get the services and get the assistance that they need in order to create a sustainable safety mechanism for our community. I would argue to you that while there is a key component to public safety that is driven by enforcement and policing, in order to create sustainable, safe communities, we need to make sure that the model goes beyond enforcement. We need to make sure that our police leaders understand that enforcement is generally the last resort after everything else has failed. We need to make sure that we have law enforcement leaders and we have community leaders that work together on preventing crime in the first place and providing, thank you, in providing opportunities for young people to grow up in a place where they don't have to be fearful. Providing opportunities for young people to make sure that they can walk safely to a local park and be able to enjoy that park the way that kids in any other neighborhood can. Ensuring that it's safe to go to school and not to be fearful about going to school. Those are things that we have to demand of our elected officials. We have to demand that of our law enforcement leaders. We have to turn around the dialogue around safety, and we have to begin a conversation where enforcement and incarceration are only left as a last alternative. For instance, recently, after 2 years of a lot of hard work for people in my office, including Terry Anderson, who's sitting there somewhere, we got a grant from the Justice Department. And this grant was initially designed to be given to a district attorney's office or a law enforcement agency in order to quote-unquote fight crime. And when we applied the first year, we were turned down and we were told, you know, you really have a wonderful application here, but this is way too far outside the box for us. And the reason why it was too far outside the box is because we say, you know what, we believe that we can create a safer community by reducing victimization. We believe that if we work with victims, especially those victims that are being re-victimized over and over again, and we show them a different way to deal with safety around them, and if we deal with the impact of trauma, that we can actually create a safer community. And this year we got the grant, and we're now in the process of working with community-based organizations, working with nonprofits, working with the community in order to develop a program in our Bayview area, which is one of the most impacted areas with crime in San Francisco, and basically take the criminal justice system and turn it around, turn the whole process around, and concentrating and reducing victimization and working with those that are most exposed to violence and treating the trauma that is caused by exposure to violence. I would argue that this is where the future of public safety lies. And I would say that I believe that the work that you as a group of people and as an organization are doing is very important, because often the face of victimization in this country, while done in a well-intended manner, hasn't always addressed where the majority of the victims are. Having worked for many years in minority communities, and myself coming from a minority community, I can tell you that often the victims in my community where I grew up are not necessarily looking to lock up their kids for decades. They are looking to stop the pain. They are looking to stop crime. They are looking to have a safer community, but they are not looking to incarcerate their young people for extended periods of time. Unfortunately, that victim's voice has not been heard in this country. Now, I don't want to stand here and sound naive and say that there are not some people that need to be incarcerated and perhaps need to be incarcerated for the rest of their natural life. There are some people that are very, very dangerous. But that's a very small group of people. And I can tell you that from personal experience, having been in law enforcement for about 30 years, having walked foot beats in East LA, having walked foot beats in the housing developments in Watts, having worked in Newton Division, for those of you that know the area, and I can tell you, thank you, that simply incarcerating young people is not the answer. As a matter of fact, the science will tell you that when we take a low-level offender and we mix them with people that have committed more serious crimes, they themselves are more likely to become more violent, and they themselves are more likely to engage in a life of crime that they can never cycle out of it. Our entire war on drugs for the last 3 decades has been wrong-headed and has led to the incarceration and the violence and the destruction of many communities in this country. Not only now do we know that it's economically bankrupt, but it has been socially bankrupt for many, many years. We collectively not only can, but have a social obligation to turn around what has been going on in this country for the last 3 decades. We incarcerate more people in this country than any other place in the world. And we're proud of it. And I am here to tell you that we have to turn around. We cannot continue to incarcerate our young people. We cannot afford it economically, but I have to tell you that socially, we can't afford it. We're bankrupt. So I want to tell you that I really appreciate the opportunity to come here today and address you for a few minutes. I really believe that what you do is very, very important. We need to continue to reduce victimization and create survivors. And when we say survivors, I would only add, we need survivability that is sustainable. And together we can do it. Thank you so much. I'm really honored for you here. Thank you.